actually creating the plan on how to move forward. Let me just kind of really just pull 2 slides from him that was part of a larger presentation there that really is motivating this. And this is changing from a cohort membership model to an annual rolling admissions model for membership. And the logic here, the motivation is actually very, very simple. The reason we did cohorts before, we've gone 6, 25, 43, was literally because each step, an overused term, but each step was a phase change, trying to see, first off, could we have a network? That was the 6. What's it like to go from 6, which was sort of a small business model, really, if you will, to 25? That was a big phase change because, as I've said before, when we had 6, we all knew each other intimately, probably too well, in terms of knowing everything that was going on in our campuses. When we went to 25, it was a whole different sort of knowledge of each other and what we were doing and how to evaluate and how to communicate, how to be together. And then the next step was in a similar phase. Those were, if you will, experiments along the way that, in fact, the NSF funded to see how the network would grow. Now we're in a much more mature and stable situation. But the problem with the cohort model is that one of the things that we've learned, which is what we set up here, in a network of our current size, which is, now it's 38, in fact, this is the point, somewhere, as I often say, at this very minute, somewhere in this network, the leadership is changing. Typical leadership of deans is 7 years. We're 42, we were 42. So you can do the math. Every year, there's going to be a leadership turnover of 7 institutions. And what we have learned is that often leads, often is too strong. It is when an institution leaves, this is a better way to put it, it is usually because of leadership change, different priorities, different financial priorities. Sometimes it's literally different financial situations. There have been a few institutions who have left because they really didn't feel like they were just getting traction. They themselves didn't feel like they were actually making progress. There have been a couple institutions that have left because they felt like they already had what the network was providing. So there are other reasons, but the primary reason is leadership change. So the point is that there will always be institutions when we're this large who will be leaving. At the same time, we have many, many institutions who want to join, but we have no way to let them in. We have no way to bring them into the network because of our cohort model. Needless to say, this is a model for systemic reduction in our numbers, which in itself is not such a huge problem, but it also means we can't bring in new strength. We can't bring in new ideas. We can't bring in new partners. And so really, because of that logic, the idea here, in a nutshell, is to have a rolling membership, to be more organic, if you will, and more responsive to the realities of higher education. And as I mentioned yesterday, we actually have 2 institutions who have, just to really drive home the leadership point, left and come back as their leadership changed. This is something we've learned, essentially. So the gist of the point here is not so much, if you will, to make up for departures, but rather to just have this continual flux within the network of new ideas, new members, new strengths. This is not necessarily an expansion model, and what I mean by that is the cohort ideas were very explicitly expansion. That was the intent. That was the experiment. This is not driven by numbers. It's not driven by the sense of, well, we want to be 70, or we want to be any particular number. It really is trying to be an organic, responsive model that will allow us to be responsive to what the two national landscapes wish to do. So I just want to be clear about that. There's no even in the back of our mind sort of implicit, we're trying to grow to a certain size. We may grow, we may not. I really don't know in a sense. It's a little strong to say I don't care, because I think the more that we are, the more impact we have. But that's not the driver. So in a nutshell, and this was the slide from Yale, we talked about this in early 2017. This was actually the leadership team one, actually maybe now 2 generations ago. And we decided it was too soon, so we deferred bringing this to you for a year. And what Kitch has been doing when we have inquiries is basically she's been saying to these inquiries, and Kitch can tell you this, we'll contact you in a year. You know, we're still trying to get our feet on the ground in terms of the current fourth wave. We don't use that phrase. We'll be talking about this in a year. And the idea is starting in spring 2019, we especially to keep things simple the first time, because we've never done global membership before. The idea is really the same application process and the same onboarding process. Kitch will give you a little more detail on that shortly. But the upshot of this is, as I say, to have this rolling process of a few institutions at a time rather than a cohort process of 5 institutions at a time. So let me stop first before Kitch comes up and talks about, you know, details. Just any clarifying questions. We'll go into the sociocracy method, but just any clarifying questions or comments on any of those overarching thoughts. Ben?
Well, I'm in support of it. I mean, I think it's a good idea to.
This is the time for clarifying thoughts.
Okay, so clarifying thoughts. This one comes from Rick Campa, because I'm his proxy in this, which is that we make sure that the institutions that we're coming to, or that are coming to us, know not only the value of the men being in CIRTL, but also historically why people have left. Mm-hmm. And to your point from the previous slide, and that would be something different than the process we did last.
Sure. All right, Kitch, you wanna, where's Kitch? Back here. So as they say, there's been a group, I want to give Kitch a lot of credit. We've been thinking about, you know, basically how to do this. I do want to say that we're going to use the sociocracy, we're going to use the method, the decision-making method from yesterday. That method is not about whether we do it this way or that way at detail level. We want you to understand the thinking, but the decision is whether we use rolling memberships. That's the decision.
I have been thinking about this a great deal. I don't have a ton more details to share. As I'm electric.
I'll try. Apparently, Rick doesn't like culture.
It works fine up down. if you had a chance to look at hi Molly, if you're watching. The proposal that we posted online, as Bob said, I've been thinking about this a long time. We still have details to work out, but essentially to begin with, we want to begin with a small enough group that we can manage. And as we heard yesterday, many of the comments of the leadership panels and some of the breakout tables, how important it is to be able to support and onboard new members. We're planning to begin with members in the same categories of all of us in this room, from institutions that produce STEM graduate PhDs. The key point here is that we want to make sure we accept the number of members in this first, I don't want to say pilot, but a first annual rolling membership process, that we can not only manage the application process, as well as be prepared to support members, and there'll be certain commonalities because they're coming from institutions, or the institutions will be producers of STEM PhDs. Many of you know from previous cohorts of expansions, we use data from NSF to generate we have a list of the institutions, the top producers of STEM PhDs, but as noted here in the slides, and it's noted in our prior application materials that we're adapting, is that some institutions have special characteristics. Maybe it's their population, geographic location, that maybe they're not in the top 100 or not near the top of the top 100, but that would be factored into the whether they'd be invited to be part of the membership. And again, one key point is not that a hard set number, but we're anticipating in the order of 3 to 5 institutions, again, so that we can manage the process and manage the onboarding and provide the support that we heard so many of you need. And as Bob mentioned, one of the things we really, I guess, learned a little bit the hard way in this, since the last couple of years, is the turnover in leadership. And also we want to be able to put mechanisms in place to support new leaders as they're coming in, even if the institution has been a member for a certain amount of time. We heard from Mark Cox yesterday, there's a new person coming on board. How can we help that leader learn about CIRTL? So many of the things that we want to put in place for new members would be applicable to new leaders as well in the network. So as well, I'll show you a timeline in a few moments that was also posted online. What we're imagining is that we would establish a standing membership and onboarding working group. As there were some comments, thanks to those who posted on the online community about membership, is that we want to put in a place that's kind of onboarding process that's ongoing, kept up to date. And there's some relationship established between the membership and onboarding working group and new members. And again, this is an annual process that will be able to support this ongoing. So prior to opening up the application period, we would establish that group. We would finalize and post the network application and the review criteria. We're obviously building off the application that we used last time, but we want to incorporate your feedback and again, incorporate the ideas like Rick's of making sure we convey the expectations and the history of the ebb and flow of the network to potential new members. And then we'll have to finalize the timeline, and as you see, we're optimistically hoping that application and period would open November 1st. I'm not 100% sure that happens, but in this fall. So a little bit mixed up in the conversion here, but basically this is sort of, to save space, I removed that we already talked about this proposal at the last 2 administrative meetings. Here we are today on the 12th, and then you see go through an application period, ultimately with the goal of having members accepted in the spring, go through the MOU process with new institutions so that they would begin on or about July 1st, which is the beginning of our sort of school year, or at least by the fall. And then, okay, what's following off the screen is that then a year from now, the expectation is that we would begin the new cohort. So, and we'll obviously be build in any feedback from next fall's meeting about the process. And of course, hopefully we'll have some new members and we'll learn about their experience or initial experience. So again, with a lot of the things we're doing here, we expect we would make adjustments as we go, and we'll go through this once. We might have to adjust when we do it again for next time. Yes, next thing is head over to Adam.
See how the microphone likes me? No, it doesn't. Oh. All right. Sounds, no, doesn't sound good. All right. Oh, okay. So this is where we find out if any people off the street can find a sociocratic method, right? So let's start with, oh, here we go. Thanks for giving me something. So yesterday we went through the sociocracy method. I am going to jump ahead to sort of what we're going to do right now is clarify questions. I want to see if everyone understands the proposal. And just as a real reminder, this has been discussed for months, and the leadership team has been discussing the membership plan. It's been really well thought out. And Kathy and I were talking about this earlier, that essentially what we're doing with this decision is we're in essence charging the leadership team with figuring out and moving forward with the membership process. So we're not worried about the low-level details and getting into the weeds. It's more of a big question of, is this something we should be doing as a network? Should we move forward with the process? With that in mind, does anybody have any clarifying questions? Anything anyone wants to know? Any questions? Yeah, please. I'd say probably come up to the mic so that we can hear you and Holly can hear us over recording.
So Kitch mentioned the special characteristics of the universities that would be considered. And I think that's a really important thing to have, especially when we think about universities that have high population of underrepresented minorities. So beyond just mentioning it at the podium, I would love for it to be codified and specifically considered, and it may already be, right? But given strong consideration, maybe even beyond how many people they are.
Okay, so I think we've actually discussed this a bit, and one of the things that is not necessarily codified is the proposal, is because this may change over time, what the specific needs of specific institutions are. So we're essentially setting up a process going forward.
That becomes, I appreciate that, and that it may change over time, and it, you don't see any way that the specific principles could be specifically outlined at this point.
It's possible. I don't know, Bob, what do you think?
Your kids said, you're both right. And actually, even though that may sound like an handy-dandy answer, we're with you all the way on this. When we create, if we decide to go ahead with the rolling mission, then what the leadership team will do, we'll create essentially, if you will, we'll have to put out a document of what we're looking for.
And that will be presented to everybody. And so that's where, we'll say, especially at this time, but it's been true throughout. We're particularly interested in those institutions who, in addition to producing many PhDs, also those institutions that play an important role in determining the nature of this STEM faculty. So all I'm getting at is, yes, I think where that'll show up and where we'll all discuss it is when we actually provide to you, this is what we're going to recruit, this is how we're going to say it.
So before rolling admissions is initiated,
Yes.
that process will be set.
That's right, that's what Kitch was saying, that she will put before you the application materials and that type of thing. But I'm glad you said that because it's core.
And that's why November 1st, a little fungible.
With any luck, it will be right next to him. Kish, don't sit down next to me.
I have a question from Trevette Smith, who's the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, and he was curious about whether there was an updated CIRTL growth plan available. Slide 16 of the September 2018 meeting slides say they're working on one, but he was curious about whether there was an updated.
I don't think there is, but to be honest, I think that this process is part of that growth plan. So if we don't have the ability to grow the membership in some way, there isn't a plan, right?
Yeah, we understand that. He just feels that the network has a lot of its identity in transition, and he felt that it would be useful to have a clearer sense of that before admitting new members.
Sure, yeah.
I just want to clarify that, and we do have a document, we did for the last expansion, a document called the growth plan, and that's what I assume you're referring to, so that's what we're working on updating as part of these materials.
Okay.
And actually, I worked on it. I think it is.
Yeah.
I haven't edited version.
And I think this is where the point before that we're looking for 3 to 5 institutions this time comes into play, and part of it is we don't know how many people are going to apply, right? So we don't really know until we start this process what the longer term plan will finalize to. Sorry.
No, it's, could you say more about what that was? Say more about what's behind that question. It's important.
Well, as I said, I just have Matt's notes here with me. I'm sorry that I can't sort of channel his thought process. But yeah, I just that he felt that there was a lot of the identity that was still being worked out, and it would be useful to have a clearer understanding of that before we took on new members and, thought about what would be appropriate. I can't, I'm sorry.
I have a question on the impact of the growing. So you said you had a list of about 10 to 15 members. You're aiming for 3 to 5. Is there going to be a limit on the number of applications that can be submitted? Or are they going to, applications going to roll over? If you have new people coming in, someone could do a lot of work for putting a proposal together in maybe 15 years before they ever get into the queue to be part of the 3 to 5. So I'm just concerned about, how that's going to work.
Yeah, so my thoughts from the leadership team when we were discussing this is, like you said, we don't want people to do a lot of work for no reason and drive them away over future years. So one of the things that was on the table was maybe a 2-part application, where first one was a letter of interest with some basic information that then we can collect it and we can see are they going to be viable, and then invite people to do a full submission so that we're kind of controlling that process and not off-putting a lot of people. There are different ways that we can do this, but I agree that we don't want to just have a whole bunch of applications come in and then we just tell them no and then they go away.
If possible.
If we decide to move ahead and we have time this morning, I'd really like to get your advice on that point. I think that point is the most difficult point of this entire thing. How do we calibrate? The fact that we have 10 to 15, just to be clear, as Kitch often points out, sometimes that's from a dean, sometimes it's from a faculty member who's interested. So it doesn't mean there's actually 15 out there that are necessarily going to apply. But on the other hand, there could easily be another 15 that will. And so if we have time, I'd really like to talk about that, because we could use some advice on that one.
And if we talk about that, my question was just around messaging. So if an institution doesn't make it through to that final stage, but we think we want them as a part of the network, how do we balance that feedback so that they're not discouraged by not making it to the second round? So maybe that can be captured as part of the discussions, because that's my concern in limiting the membership, is that if there could be 10 really awesome institutions that we all want to join, I don't know how we would decide.
I don't know that we know either, to be perfectly honest. And this is part of the next steps in the process. I think it's been a common theme throughout all the discussions in the leadership team that we don't want to discourage people who we think are viable candidates and just turn them away because of limits. Which is why there needs to probably be this process for feedback and maybe a multi-step process.
Is there a time commitment for new members for how many years they have to sign up, or can they just join for 1 year and then reevaluate their membership?
I think it would be the standard process, although we haven't actually addressed this yet.
My concern in that context is that you may not see the positive impact of CIRTL after 1 year being part of the network, and so
Sure.
we may want to consider like a minimum of, let's say, 3 years for new members before they can step out, because if you have very aggressive leadership, you say, what can you show after a year, and they may not have nothing to show if they drop out right away.
I think it's a great idea. You know, as one of the fourth waivers, I think it would have been nice if we had had a specific mandate we had to join for 3 years. It would make things a little bit smoother while we're dealing with it, not to have those discussions every year for 3 years. I really like that idea personally.
Just building on what Tillman said, a comment from Rick Campbell this morning was around that very issue about maybe potentially allowing onboarding process where people engage with the CIRTL community, come to a meeting, maybe even co-facilitate a workshop before their membership can formally start.
Just to remind you all signed, we have all signed MOUs for 5 years. And I don't think this will change. The MOU is not binding. It's an MOU. It's a sense of intent. And that we would most assuredly still do. Just as a reminder of what we've done in the past.
So is the thought to have an open call, or is the thought to target to specific institutions that you've heard from in the past that are interested, or that we want to bring into the network for specific reasons?
Great question. We've actually talked about this as well. I think the idea is to have an open call because it needs to be for equity reasons. I mean, I don't think we would close the application process, but I think we would try to do targeted marketing to see if we can address any issues or build within the network, which is where the idea of looking at top 100 universities is the idea for marketing purposes, but I don't think that the idea was to limit it there. Is that fair?
To bounce back to Yale, I thought the clearest message we got from Yale was to make sure that we were inclusive in how we do this. And that was heard loud and clear and welcomed. And so, in a sense, we keep getting at the same issue, which is how are we going to, how do we accomplish both a small number so that we don't disrupt our current situation, and make sure at the same time that we're highly inclusive in the applicants? I honestly think that is the biggest issue. Question?
Oh,
I have a comment about that. One good thing is we can say that we're going to have an annual process, so that it's not necessary that people apply now. This is their only window to get in. And that may be very useful to many institutions who might want to take longer to be ready to get their application together than this short timeline is going to allow. So that, as long as we're really clear that this is now an ongoing process and the opportunity will arise next year, then that may help. It not be so negative for people who may not be able to get in this first round.
I think it also enables us to, at the point of inquiry, have a discussion about what needs to be in place at the institution to make them really viable and work with them to try to get them ready for an application, which might not be the only one-time shot. And I think we all agree this will probably be a process that refines itself over time, right? And what we're doing today is hopefully moving forward on getting started and getting this charge to go figure it out and get the ball rolling, and let's do this in concept. But I think that there will be revisions that happen as we ramp the process up, the iterative. More clarifying questions, thoughts?
So I have a clarifying question.
Okay.
I have a clarifying question of all of you, and that is, we're going to do rounds so you also have a chance to speak up. Is there anyone who would argue that we should let in, it's wrong, except 10 to 15? I mean, I at least want to sort of have, you know, if someone thinks we should, please speak up.
So I guess I have a slightly different perspective, which is not that basically we should see what the pool is and make a determination about, I mean, so basically not set a hard cap of 3 to 5, but not say, oh, let's take everyone that applies, but basically in the first round, see what the pool is and how ready the institutions are, and make a filter based on that information so that we could potentially get as many promising institutions as possible, but allow for the opportunity to say, we're not sure you have everything in place, or we'd love to see an application from you, but you're, to give that feedback. But I guess I worry about, if an institution really is ready and we just have this hard cap, I worry about that being hard to distinguish. So to me, that first round of an application is an opportunity to see what the pool actually is and what it looks like.
Yeah, and I don't think it is a hard cap.
I want to be clear, Sarah, what you're saying. Are you saying that if there are 10 to 15 ready institutions, you would argue we should accept them?
I would,
Okay.
yeah, or at least, I would, yes, if they were truly from.
And I think that's why it's a 3 to 5 range, is we've talked about the fact that we don't really know what that number is going to be. So I don't think it's a hard cap of 5. I think we weren't thinking 30.
I want to be clear, because this is really fundamental. We talked about it at Yale, and I just want to make sure we're all in the same place. The reason for something like 3 to 5 was because a lot of people, I think quite reasonably, were saying that the fourth wave isn't really settled yet. Is it time to bring in, if you will, a fifth wave? And I thought the general sense at Yale was that as Kitch phrased it, we were comfortable with bringing in a small number that wouldn't disrupt is too strong a word, but distort the evolution that we're going through right now. 10 to 15 is very different from 3 to 5 in terms of its impact on the network. So I don't want to be casual about this. This is actually a very important point. That's why Kitch said 3 to 5, whether it's 5 or 6 or 4 or 3, but we really weren't thinking 15.
I agree. Which is one of the reasons we talked about it being rolling, right? Because that way you can build it over a couple of years.
So I was thinking about this idea about how many institutions and why we were thinking 3 to 5. And to Sarah's point, I think the rubric should communicate what the expectation is of the threshold of going over almost pass fail. Although it isn't going to be just if you meet these requirements, you move on. What we need to think about is what is the rationale behind where it becomes too disruptive? We've done it before, and it can be a bit painful, but we've been successful. We're a larger organization now, so we have more momentum and capacity to bring more people on. So when we think about what this rubric is that says this is what your institution needs to be prepared to do, we can think about maybe also what we need to be prepared to do so that we can hopefully be more open to accepting more institutions, whether it's 3, 5, 7, 9, whatever. And that's a way for us to think about not just what do they need to do, but what can we do, and be more specific about that.
Thanks. I'm a fourth grader, so I don't know the history on how these things have played out except for my wave. But I agree. I think that there has been a lot of discussion as we've worked on this process about the history of onboarding. So, but my knowledge just comes from those conversations, not from actually experiencing it.
To Bob's question about you should have 10 or 15, I think we should allow everyone who's qualified. If it's a large number the first year, it's likely not going to be a large number again. So it will be like a fifth wave. Like we have discussed now, we've dealt with this before. And if it's 15 every year, that's great because then we have a huge network and it works out. We might need to think about structural issues then, but I mean, one of the goals of CIRTL was to make it a large network with brand that's recognized throughout the country. So I think it's really artificial to try to limit the number of institutions that have interest is there, that's happening here.
So
flip to Andy's statement, and from the point of view of the process, we're probably getting near the time for rounds, as we're starting to argue collegially to the point rather than clarifying.
This is a newcomer question, but kind of feeding off of what Tillman said. I was wondering if you could clarify the potential disruption that would happen if there was too many new members. It's not clear what that could be.
Yeah, I'm not sure, so.
Well, I can speak to a little bit, and from my perspective, I think as we're learning that there's a lot of turnover in leadership, new folks coming in, that I wish that we were providing more support to some of the new institutions, the fourth wave institutions even, who are initiating, getting their programs going, communication, a little bit more outreach. For those of you who were around at the beginning of the fourth wave, we had an onboarding process and paired institutions and sort of little mentoring, and that seemed to have fallen away. And so I'd like to see some of that come back up, and I think it may not have been realistic to have, 40 institutions in pairs to try to get through this onboarding. That I don't know for sure, but I think we could be more successful if we had an established committee, working group, and somebody, CIRTL Central could facilitate a pairing, a mentor, a match. We heard yesterday about, there's maybe 3 to 4 different models within the network. Maybe we can match people from one model to new members or even existing members. So I believe that would be more manageable with the current staff and resources, and that would be potentially more successful for all institutions. And, some institutions have resources and staff and up and going, and others are still, it's a small, slow process. So I don't want to shift our attention to the brand new folks at the expense of second and third and fourth wave people, institutions who may have new leaders in the sense that they're almost a new wave person. So that's, at least from my perspective, of what I'm thinking. Just want to do it. I want to make sure we do it right and make sure we do everything to make new institutions be successful.
This will be a short question, but it seems like a more clarifying question. I'm not clear if an essential part of the proposal is that this does start immediately, in December, November, December, or if that's
It's a cycle, and so the idea was to trigger it if we move forward and start working through all the details on applications and marketing and everything. I think it's the goal. Whether it happens on that specific timeline, I think is not entirely clear, but it is to move forward now.
Yeah, but there's a difference between getting ready and then actually opening for applications.
Yeah. Well, there was a logic to the cycle last time, and honestly, I think it worked, which was applications, recruiting, et cetera, in the fall, decisions in February, onboarding in late spring, summer, and then there was a natural start in the academic year. Does it absolutely have to be that way? Probably not, but it worked pretty well, especially having that summertime for the onboarding. That was the reason. So, I could be wrong, but I think it's kind of an annual decision.
Which is why we like to get started. All right, so let's move to our rounds. So we'll go around, everyone sort of tell us what you're thinking. Oh, let's have fun, let's start with Bob. Joanne, let's start.
So this is my first CIRTL meeting, so I don't know all the history, but I'm thinking a lot about the initial question about diversity and how we have to be careful not to perpetuate historical inequities and balance sort of the need to bring in strong partners with the need to ensure that we're being inclusive and diverse. But I'm generally supportive.
Hi, I'm first time CIRTL participant at one of these meetings, and I just want to second your point about diversity. It's very important, but also as we're evolving our teaching as research program, I think the mentoring piece is really key, so I appreciate that point as well. I'm Lee from UCLA.
Hi, it's Rachel from UCLA. I agree, and I think I generally approve, but I also feel like the mentoring piece and helping, I just want to say I really appreciate what Paige said about making sure that people have the support they need when they come in.
My name is Chris Miller. I'm from UGA, University of Georgia. And I think just hearing what everybody has said, I'm leaning a little bit more towards, I believe Sarah's comment of seeing what the whole pool is and working from that as a basis to determine potentially the number of people that we feel we can support at that point.
I'm Denise Pope from CIRTL Central, and my question about when this would happen was partly a panic about how we might make this work. But I also, I think this is a great idea to do an annual process. I guess I feel like this is just the way I do things. I like to have kind of everything in place before kind of, starting the process. So I guess I feel like if we had to, wait until next year to actually open for applications, that would give us plenty of time to have all of these pieces that many people have said should be in place. So that's just my concern.
I'm Jenny from Rochester. I'm in favour of the process, but I do also want to plug the diversity element.
Judy from the University of Georgia. I agree with the process. I agree with the idea of the rolling admissions. But also with Denise that I don't want to rush the process so much that we haven't worked out some of these details. I don't know that we have to wait a year to do it, but I want to make sure we have a flexible timeline and making sure that this is right when we do it.
I'm Jim Grover from the University of Texas at Arlington. I support this proposal as a framework for going forward.
Kathy Miller, Washington University in St. Louis. I think this is a necessary step that we have to take, and the first time through, it's gonna be rough, probably. We're gonna have some glitches because it's a new thing for us, but I think we have to move forward on it, and so I'm very enthusiastic to move forward, and I'm not too worried about a lot of the details because in the last round, I was very deeply involved in recruiting, and we had a very good process, and we can build from that. So a lot of the stuff that people are worried about was part of the process last time. We're just adapting it to this new thing, so it's not starting from scratch. So I'm really enthusiastic about moving forward with this. I think when we brought in the last wave, we realized that we needed to do this as the next thing that's going to happen, and I'm happy that it's actually going to happen.
Rob Linsenmeyer, Northwestern. I think we do need to move forward, otherwise these details will get deferred and we won't actually figure them out until a year from now when we're back at the same place. So I think we need to give a committee charge to go ahead and figure out the details. And the only other comment I'd make is the one that some of us brought up yesterday, which is now we have this research that shows what makes an effective CIRTL institution, and we need to build that into the application process. I can't remember what my application process was like except for the 2-pager. So it could be a little different and involve that research.
Mark Cox, UT El Paso. I just wanted to again stress, there's been talk about diversifying university and I understand the need to focus on the top 100, to maximize the impact of the work we're doing. But at the same time, UTEP's not among those top 100, right? We're a Hispanic serving institution. I think we want to be careful, and I'm not saying it's true, but we want to be careful that the network doesn't appear as if it just has this token, we need to avoid tokenism. At the same time, I think faculty or students coming out of the HSIs and HBCUs, statistically speaking, are going to be the faculty at those institutions in the future. And so targeting some of the larger HSIs and HBCUs, I think ultimately is going to be more impactful for underrepresented minority students in the long run. So I think we really need to, I'm a big fan of the rolling process, but I think we need to have a strong eye towards diversity as well as we go forward.
Lisa Kelly, University of Iowa. I'm also in favor. I think growth is an important thing. I kind of think about at one moment we were at 46 and then it dipped down a little bit. So adding a few more would kind of just equalize us back to where at one moment in time we were, and then potentially grow from there. I echo what I think Sarah and Tillman said about let's look at the pool, let's see who is out there interested, and if there's a lot of really ready people right away, that actually speaks to their ability to jump on an application and do something, and they might be really great partners. And if there's other institutions that are interested but not quite ready, someone else said this too, we have a rolling thing, they can wait another year, and then things I think, like Tillman said, will stabilize. I don't think we're looking at 15 every single year, but the initial energy might be 15 right away, and maybe that's okay.
Hello, Jen Sanford, Darcy University. I'm in support. I echo what a lot of people said about we have to be mindful of diversity and so on. I do like the idea of having the sort of pre-application and then the formal application, because that way it addresses the concern people had about people spending a lot of time and feeling disgruntled. If we do that, we'll get a little heads up about how many people are interested, and then we can start to think about how we mentor institutions, and we can make some decisions as a network about what the right priorities are for this particular round, and then think about how to foster those other relationships. So generally in support.
Lauren Woods, Northwestern. Yeah, let's bring more people on. And Jen had some great comments, and I would second those. And I think when we're going from the third to the fourth wave, it was a really big wave because we doubled basically in size. And even if we bring in 10 institutions, it might not be a wave, but a splash. And so I think we're better equipped to do it.
Would it be the first splash or the fifth splash?
I'm Chris Chen, Columbia University. So I'm generally in favor of this motion. One comment I did want to make was in around whether or not institutions should commit to a multi-year commitment at the beginning. Since at Columbia, we've been only in there for a few years, but we had our executive director leave almost immediately after we were admitted to CIRTL, and I'm glad we're able to stay and to get some commitment. But at the same time, to me, though I think it's good, it may be trickier for some institutions to maybe commit to that. I know that if we had to make a 3-year commitment when we were reconsidering whether or not this in CIRTL this past year, I'm not sure if we would have recommitted to do that. So I think it's a good idea to do so they can really see the benefits of CIRTL before they decide whether or not they're going to opt out. But I'm just wondering whether or not if doing so would raise the barrier to entry to be high enough that other institutions wouldn't consider sticking around the network. But this might be fixed by having a strong mentorship program to kind of show a peer institution how what the way is, so they might be able to tell that story even if not at their own institution, someone else. Much like you.
Hi, I'm Kate with CIRTL Central. I like the idea of early membership. I just fully want to echo what you said, Mark, about tokenism, equity, inclusion. I think those are incredibly important factors for us to think about as we work to figure out the details of what this process actually looks like in practice.
Oh, hi, I'm Devin Shepherd from CIRTL Central. I'm brand new, so I don't know a lot about this process, but to me it sounds a lot like what startups encounter all the time. How can you keep the integrity and usefulness of the product while making it as accessible as possible? So I'd be interested to hear more on that kind of topic, but yeah, I don't have much more to say. It sounds great.
I'm Paul Kappas from Yale University, support the rolling model. Also the 3 to 5, I think makes sense for this year. And then a year from now, we can hear from Kitchen how that's going and how many applications there were, and then make we assess how many to take on per year.
Hi, I'm Shannon Patton with CIRTL Central. I think there's obviously a lot of details still to iron out, but I like the rolling process and the idea of the working group to continue moving these thoughts forward.
Bill was choosing from LSU, so I like the rolling process. I think this is a great idea. I'd actually like to see mentoring start at the time that people are preparing their applications. So we start that early, and I think that may be a way to help sort of sort out the institutions that are really interested ultimately in going forward from those who aren't, with some real detailed planning sort of on their parts. That might change the application process, but I think in the end, it would serve them well and serve us well.
Hi, my name is Ahmed Ibrahim, and I am proxy for Kelly Clark. I'm in favor of the rolling process. Thank you.
Kelly Carter, UAB. I'm in favor of the rolling process, and I agree with Bill about mentoring the institutions.
Don Gibbon, UW-Madison. I'm in favor of the proposal, and having had the opportunity to work with a non-CIRTL institution on programming this fall, it would be great to take advantage of their excitement of the network and what they see as the benefits to joining and get them on board.
Marsha Yamamoto, University of Colorado. I am generally supportive of the proposal as it stands. I would encourage us to be not just mindful of diversity, but proactive about it and aware of the many benefits that a more diverse network in every way can bring to the organization and not just, as was said before, to special admittance kind of mentality, but an enriching and growing the organization.
I'm Jean Otsuki from Boston University, and another comment from Matt that he would like to see every other year model, just so that we could devote more attention to supporting the new institutions as they come in before taking on a new crop. And no comment from me.
Hi, Monica Carter, University at Buffalo, and as a fourth wave institution, I really feel what Kitch is saying, that to make sure that the CIRTL Central is ready and prepared to support the number of institutions that are being onboarded, and maybe consider surveying the fourth wave if you haven't already, to see where we ran into trouble, so that you're prepared for those same issues going forward.
Good morning, Denise Leonard, Washington University. I'm in favor of the rolling admissions plan. And I'd like to also support and echo the other comments in regards to diversity and being attentive to other institutions who are not necessarily the 100 top producers of STEM graduates, but are doing a wonderful, wonderful job at bringing in students who are underrepresented in STEM.
Hi, I'm Mike Reese from Johns Hopkins. I support the proposal. I just want to put a plug in for the research findings that we had yesterday as a foundation for writing the rubric, especially the ideas around the foundations of successful local programs, the cultural and structural perspectives. Not that we expect new institutions to be there, but at least be able to show they have the foundations of those ideas. Because if the institutions we choose not to accept, at least we have a basis for how we're making the decision, in addition to, as Monica suggested, surveying the other institution, the fourth wave institutions about what worked and what didn't.
Morning, George Cunningham, Texas A&M, and I like the idea of the proposal, and I also like the idea of maybe accepting that and then codifying some of the process and then rolling it out next year. And I know that means that we wait a year, but it also means that we have a vetted process. I think there's a lot of comments in here about the influence of diversity and bringing in different universities, and I would also say that I appreciate the idea of we don't want it to be a token offer, and I don't see that as a dichotomy. I see the diversity of the institutions and the people sitting around this room as adding to the strength of CIRTL, not an either or, but we become more effective through the diversity of our universities.
Cora Macbeth, Emory University. I like the proposal, and I appreciate all the comments from folks suggesting that we wait to get all of the pieces in place before we do this. However, I do feel it's a little bit like we're kicking the can down the road because we will likely be in the same place next year. Once we put the call for applications out, I think we'll get a better sense of who's interested, how many people want to join the network. And the other thing that I would add is I think it's really important if we do targeted outreach, maybe to think about going to meetings and places where we can do information sessions about what the CIRTL network is. And talking to people about what the onboarding is. I've talked to a few schools about it, and I've been really honest that, it's not like day one you're in CIRTL, it changes your campus, right? There's this slow onboarding, and I would just want schools to know that, to really understand that it's a process. And the more education we can do about the network and onboarding, I think the more successful we will be, because it's not just about getting people to join the network, but it's about getting them to stay and invest in the program.
Morning, Deborah Allen, University of Delaware. Like when you get to this point, there's nothing to say, so I to pick and choose what I want to agree with. And I'm in favor of the proposal. I'm confident that we can work out the details. I think the timeline will work, for the reasons that Cora talked about. And I think it'd be a big missed opportunity if we didn't think of this as a way to diversify the network.
Kamala from Howard, I support the proposal, and I also want to echo the sentiments of some of my colleagues that diversity is going to be a crucial issue as we move forward.
Tracy Irish, UMBC, I also support the proposal. April Jukes, University of Pittsburgh. I also support the proposal, and I'm also a proxy for Mary, who's not here. And she wants to reiterate some of the things that I've heard today, which include, not being stuck with the top 100, making sure that we think about how ready the institutions are, diversity, the way that they can benefit from us and they can benefit from their additions. And she was also a little more flexible from the 3 to 5 standpoint. I think from my discussions with her, we don't want to overrun the network, but we also don't want to have like a cutoff. It does need to be something that's discussed as far as, what we can handle and what the applications look like.
No comment.
Lucas Still, University of Wisconsin-Madison here. So I fully support the proposal, and also just to echo Robin and Mike's comments, I think a lot of the research we presented yesterday has a lot of applicability for both the selection and the support processes.
Jess Maher, Madison. I agree with Deborah that it's hard to add anything original to the conversation. I really appreciate the comments going around. And I also agree that I think I have confidence in the network. I think that we can take this on and do it in the timeframe being proposed. And I also think this is a great opportunity, as others have mentioned, to both diversify the network, but also bring in any number of institutions, move beyond that 3 to 5, if there are in fact a nice healthy pool out there that are ready to get CIRTL on their campuses.
Hi, Danny Mann, UC Irvine. I am supportive and I agree with what most people are saying.
Beth Jacob, UMass Amherst. I support the proposal. I want to point out that the increased flexibility in how we use our Cat 1 contributions might be a way to get more people involved in recruiting, supporting, and mentoring the new institutions. And also, one thing I don't know about is exactly how the increase in income from institutional fees could translate into increased staff for CIRTL Central. And both of those things might mitigate any problems that we have with taking in more than 3 or 5 institutions.
Tillman Wolf, UMass, I think it's a good plan.
Jeffrey Frankie, University of Maryland, College Park. While I support the concept, I am on the fence whether I support the proposal or not, because I'm not convinced in terms of disruption, whether we're going to go into a continuous cycle of disruption because we'll be onboarding the same time we're trying to do the evaluations. It's going, I'm not clear where, based on whether a cohort bringing it in and having, a very defined period as opposed to having a continuous period of disruption. I'm not sure I'm at the paramount objection. I think that one idea that I heard was doing it every other year actually spaces out the work where it's not being, you're not combining onboarding with, with the application process continuing on and creating. So you're consuming CIRTL Central in both of those instances in a way that I think that, will distract from their ability to do the programming as well. If that's what I'm hearing from, from what, talking about this, the disruption.
Hi, I'm Sarah from BU. I'm supportive of bringing on new members. I think that's crucial, and I definitely agree about diversifying the network. I also agree with my colleagues, though, at BU. I'm not sure I support the proposal as written. I like the wave model. I like the idea of institutions joining together in a spaced out way. I think there's a lot of norming of just getting used to how these meetings run and the lingo and what it means to be a part of CIRTL. And I think it would be really hard to establish that, as Jeffrey's pointed out, with a lot of new people coming in all the time. So, I actually like the way it's been done in the past to a certain extent. I think having a wave system is good, and I also like the idea of, again, keeping the number of people that we might accept flexible, and I think bringing people in every year would require that we accept less all at once, and so it eliminates that flexibility a little bit.
Bennett Goldberg, Northwestern. So my first comment is from Rick Campa, and he's in favor of the proposal, but I did text him about whether or not he would be also supportive of perhaps every other year, and he is. It's unclear to me as written whether or not that could be incorporated as the project moves forward. I am in general, this is myself speaking now, in favor of new memberships, supporting the diversity and growth in the network in that way in particular. And I trust us to not necessarily have everything written down. But I do want to think about not being in an annual process of chaos.
As Jeffrey said.
Hi, Colleen McGlynn at Cornell University. Also, Barbara Newth forgot that we had another vote today, so she's willing to designate a proxy if it's not too late. But if it is too late, I am sure she would understand because she's a stickler for rules.
She already asked, by the way.
Okay, so I generally am in support of the proposal. I also think that we should consider kind of more holistic admissions criteria, and I think we should specify a list of possible types of criteria that we're looking for in terms of diversity of institutions. And it could be as simple as saying, for example, these types of characteristics, including but not limited to allow some flexibility. But I do think it would be better to have something written down as far as guidelines and mission statement about what we're aiming for and why in terms of recruitment of new institutions.
Hi, I'm Julia Johnson from Washington, St. Louis. Generally in favor of the proposal, but again, I just want to reiterate how important it is that we don't just say that we want diversity in the institutions, but we're really intentional about seeking that out and supporting those institutions as we go forward, because I think it's really central to who we are as a network.
Robin Greenler, and I'm in CIRTL Central. In general, I'm in favor of the proposal, and I'm fine with us working out the details as we go along. I don't feel like we need to necessarily have all of those there. And I think it's a good idea to do some intentional reaching out to institutions that have some more diversity. But I do want to respond to the issue of kind of, if we have a rolling process, how many? Because I think if there's a lot that are ready and really ready to go, I think there's some real strength in taking advantage of that. On the other hand, it is a lot of work, and we can't just spread ourselves thinner. And the onboarding takes a lot of work from CIRTL Central, or it takes a lot of work from you all doing some really, really intentional mentoring, more than kind of an email once every 3 months, right? And so in one place or the other, that work has to be put in to successfully do that. And if it isn't put in, what happens is then all the rest of the things we're doing just get spread thinner, and we do less of that. We do less support, less of other things. And I don't hear right now that the current network is at a place where people are ready to go on their own without much support. So I think we want to really be very intentional about that choice. And if we take in more, where is that support going to come from? And there's a whole bunch of different ways it could happen, but the one way it shouldn't happen is, well, it'll just happen. We'll figure it out, and kind of we'll talk about it at next year's meeting.
What's that? Yeah, I actually, as Captain pointed out last time, I get to put my own opinion in now, right? As
So I'm supportive of the process. I appreciated all the comments that everybody made. I do agree that we sort of have to do it to get it going. And I want to echo Robin's comment. I was going to say something similar. It's not just capacity of CIRTL Central. It's also a lot of the networking and support would have to come from many of you. And we heard all about the wonderful new grants and initiatives and all those things getting off the ground. So I just want to, the capacity is both CIRTL Central and all of you. And so that's what I just want, hoping for a manageable start. But I'm anxious to start because I'm sure we'll discover things that need to be fixed. But until you do it, it won't get fixed.
Kitch just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say exactly the same thing. CIRTL Central coordinates. CIRTL Central doesn't do, and especially actually they do quite a bit. But especially when it comes to mentoring, to being present for the new members, it's about the network. It's about us. With CIRTL Central certainly playing a major coordinating role in that. I'm strongly supportive. I think everything literally has been a great discussion, a lot of new ideas. I think that I'm a strong believer in doing by doing. You can plan forever, especially if it is rolling. For example, even the biannual question, which I think is a very interesting suggestion. We'll know.
I have one more comment.
I'm sorry, you've had your time. I mean, we'll know by next spring whether we want to do this again right away. That's part of learning about this. So even that commitment to whether it's annual or biannual, the real key is rolling. That's really the key in all of this. All right.
A little distracted. A couple of people had comments about maybe perhaps disruptions or having the cohort round, but I think we've learned is we already are in a continuous state of disruption, if you will, with the change in leadership. I mean, we've had some institutions where an administrator and both leaders have turned over, so in a sense, it's almost a brand new member, and that's happening continuously. So I think the